Hey y'all, Daniel from Iron Man here. Hope everyone's having a great day. Before we get into the video today, which we're going to be talking about TB-500, I want to say this is not medical advice and this is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Consult your physician for medical advice because I am not one. All right, now that that's out of the way, first thing I want to say, this is totally powered by Gorilla Mind. I'm not even sponsored by them. I'm a huge fan of Derek from More Plates, More Dates. Please sponsor us. I love your products. And don't mind the L-glutamine all over my shirt. Looks like I went crazy at a bar. But TB-500, what is this compound? Because I see it all over online. People are kind of mischaracterizing it, in my opinion, as just another regenerative compound, which it is by all means, but that's not the full story. It's actually combined with BPC, one of the most sold, researched, and frankly misunderstood peptides in all of this category. It's marketed as a healing accelerant for tendons, ligaments, bones, what have you, and it's the go-to stack partner for BPC 157 and it's been banned publicly from competitive sports since I believe 2015. Don't quote me on that. Here's the problem, but that a lot of people don't know. Almost none of the marketing copy you've read about TB-500 is actually describing TB-500. It's describing its parent molecule, which is completely different, much larger peptide with actual clinic trial history. Today we're separating, as always, from what's real, borrowed, and what's just vibes. So let's start with the identity confusion that a lot of people are talking about online, because it matters more than people think. So thymosin beta-4, TB4, is actually a naturally occurring endogenously produced peptide in the human body. 43 amino acid profile, one of the larger chains, and it's actually one of the most abundant intracellular proteins in your cells, and it's been studied in the early 90s for roles in wound healing, cardiac repair, and even eye disease. And TB-500, it's not that. It's not thymosin beta-4. That is what it was synthesized after. Remember, every peptide that you see in a vial right there, that's synthetic. These are not the endogenously produced peptides. What TB-500 is only a synthetic 7 amino acid fragment replicating parts of TB4. It's the sequence ACLKKTETQ that corresponds to the actin-binding region of the TB4. So basically the transportation module of it. It's roughly only a sixth size of the parent molecule. So whenever you see TB500 actively is a identical copy to thymosin beta-4, it is not. It is part of the compound. But why does this actually matter other than the actual length of the chain? Because when you see claims like three phase two clinical trials, no adverse events, those trials were run on full length TB4 and scientifically on an ophthalmolic drop called RGN 259, not on the synthetic fragment that we see today, being sold as TB500. A 2026 scoping review of the tissue repair literature found that direct TB500 evidence was limited essentially to one mixed experimental study that wasn't even funded. So almost everything in the TB500 research you've cited is actually thymosin beta-4 research, not TB500. I want to make that clear. Ah. So the best characterized job of this molecule, and we're talking about TB500, is either at length or actin regulation. So actin is the cytoskeleton protein that lets cells change shape and move. So TB4, by extension, we're relating this to TB500 since it does have that fragment, is that it binds and sequesters monomeric G-actin. What is that? That single mechanism is the foundation for almost everything downstream. Cell migration, wound edge closure, blood vessel formation, because endothelial cells need to physically move in order to build new vasculature. So this is the process that TB4, by extension TB500, promote, the movement of the cells to the relevant parties. So it's not necessarily telling the body to regenerate those areas. It is facilitating the movement. And the second mechanism that expanded the story significantly, 2004, a paper by Bach, Marquette, and colleagues showed that TB4 activates integrin-linked kinase, ILK, which drives downstream AKT phosphorylation. That's a cell survival signaling pathway, not just the structural one that we see from other peptides. That finding what pulled TB4 into cardiac research after a heart attack, you're not just trying to help cells move, you're trying to keep them alive, essentially. So mechanicalistically, excuse me, the story is coherent and well supported, but the problem is not the biology, it's the actual translation that we see on these research papers. And the part that basically I see that's never highlighted in this space is the slowdown, I guess that I'll call it that. Um, once TB4 eye drops and the RG259 formulation have been through phase 2 clinical trials for eye disease and neurotrophic corneal defects. So the actual compound itself, TB4, and the pharmaceutical formulation, RG259, not TB-500, have been through phase 2 trials, actively funded and complete. Those results are public. Across 3 phase 2 ocular trials, researchers reported efficacy signals with no evidence of adverse events. That's great. Very well tolerated, by the way. Really not a concerning peptide from a safety profile compared to the other ones we've covered. But there's also compassionate use data of chronic non-healing corneal ulcers. We still are pending on the FDA approval. It hasn't crossed the finish line despite 2 decades of work, and it is well researched. But since there is not a lot of literature supporting TB-500 itself, rather thymosin beta-4, that is where the disconnect is. So cardiac research is real, but extremely early. So we do have a completed phase 2B trial out of China. I mainly read the literature based on the United States government, the public records that we have there, but I did my best to translate this and pull out the information. So, a human TB4 formulation studied in acute myocardial infarction in patients, testing multiple dosing regimes against the placebo. So, we had a placebo group and we had the TB4 group. And it wasn't the TB-500, but it was actually a randomized blinded human trial. So it's a completely different patient population and delivery context than, say, some athlete that comes in and says, "Hey, I tweaked my hamstring. Shoot me up with some TB-500." Musculoskeleton, tendon, ligament, muscle. The actual reason most of you are watching this is the thinnest category. And the dermatologic trials exist as well. So phase 2 in pressure ulcers, status ulcers, epidermolysis bullosa reportedly showed efficacy with no adverse events. Strong evidence there as well. And the 2026 scoping review that I mentioned for the tendon, ligament, and muscle found direct musculoskeletal tissue data that was comparatively sparse compared to skin, vascular, and ocular research. The tendon and ligament story you've heard is built almost entirely on animal models, such as BPC, and very anecdotal at that. So the direct correlation between tendon healing and cell transportation from this study was very anecdotal, not funded, but I just want to highlight that because we do operate on literature. But from my anecdotal experience, healed my tibial plateau fracture and meniscus repair. So do with that what you will. Including the well-known pattern of the veterinary use, it's actually used a lot in race horses. I bet you didn't know that. Which itself is how the peptide even ended up on the doping radar in the first place, which is what I'll get into right now. But here's the piece that most content in this space either does not know or conveniently skips over, is that research raised the possibility that TB-500 itself may not be the primary active compound, that is, downstream effects could come from a smaller fragment that it breaks down into once it's actually inside the body. If that holds up, it reframes the entire premise. You're not necessarily injecting the healing peptide, you're injecting a precursor and hoping that your body converts it to this chain. Let me say that again. You're not actually injecting the compound that is doing the work. You're injecting the instruction, then hoping it follows the instruction. Your body is the it. So that's a meaningfully difficult or different pharmacology claim rather than what's on the label of any research chemical vendor site. So that's the kind of detail that separates I read a mechanism paper or I understand what I'm actually talking about. It doesn't mean the compound does nothing. Let's make that very clear. It means the confidence level people project onto it is not supported by what's been nailed down. And that's kind of the negatives because I do like to look into the promising, the negatives, and the actual known of the compounds. But I fully support this peptide on a personal level. And I'll tell you why. Anything that's banned by WADA shows the efficacy. Why would you ban a compound that is performance non-enhancing, or if that's even the term? WADA actually banned thymosin beta-4 and TB-500 since 2018, excuse me, not 2015, under category S2, under the peptide growth hormone. I believe that's all the related substances there. So that's at an all times ban in and out of competition. You can't even use it if you're injured. So this goes down to the Olympics, NCAA, most professional leagues, unless you're looking at low tier leagues that don't operate with WADA. Um, it's banned. Unlike BPC, which sits in the SO catch-all, TB-500 got its own specific S2 placement because WADA determined itself it has real performance relevant effects on tissue growth and repair. It's not a symbolic ban. And the FDA, where does it sit? Well, it sits on the FDA's list bulk substances presenting significant safety risk for compounding. Shoot, I thought it wasn't recording for a second. All right. Um, yeah, meaning it's restricted from being legally compounded. My light keeps turning off. That's fine. Um, and there is a process for a FDA compounding ban lift that's being worked on right now. There was a vote, I believe it was earlier last week. But even though it has clinical trials, it wasn't on the actual compound that is being marketed today. It wasn't on TB-500. So strip away the marketing. Here's if there's one thing I want you to walk away from this video, it's this right here. The underlying biology, the actin regulation, cell migration, angiogenesis is pretty solid, actually. It has tons of data. I've been reading a ton. I'll attach this PDF that I'm reading from in the description of the video. But the clinical translation of that biology into human and cardiac outcomes is real, but it's specific to TB4, thymosin beta-4, delivered in controlled formulations and trials that look 20 plus years to get where they are. So the version being sold as TB-500 for tendon and muscle recovery, it's a different, shorter molecule studied almost entirely in animals with an open question about whether it's even the active form once it's in your body. So there's been no study showing the efficacy of TB-500 relating to thymosin beta-4. There's just no literature published on it. And that doesn't really, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But if you want FDA approval, we need stronger literature because I don't agree with everything the FDA does, but I want these things to be safely distributed and for the public to use. And I'm making these videos to make sure people fund trials, to make sure people hear about these compounds and the lack of research, because you see all of these compounds that I'm holding here. I mean, they've all been studied for years, and I'm honestly shocked that there's not a lot of literature on these amazing compounds. So I'm really just raising awareness to show the lack of literature. Not saying the efficacy is not there. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that there is a lack of research with these compounds, which is disappointing. But none of that means the underlying science is fake. It just means there's a gap between here's an interesting cell biology mechanism and here's a therapy to heal your torn ligament. And it's a lot wider than the marketing suggests. And that gap is basically for you to do your own research there. Anecdotally, one of the best compounds on the market, anecdotally. But I just want to say that I'm not supporting or taking a stance here. I'm just giving you my experience and I'm not giving you medical advice. But do understand that thymosin beta 500 is different than TB4. It's a shorter compound. It's a completely different compound. It's parts of it. We could relate this to AOD. AOD is a fragment of growth hormone. Think of TB500 as a fragment of thymosin beta 4. And with that, I want you guys to check out our website, ironmanllc.com right there. We source pharmaceutical grade peptides from 503A and 503B compounding pharmacies, and we are invested in the optimization of all of the generations. We're working with my grandfather right now, who is dealing with some significant arthritis. We're working with young men who are healing from injuries, who are optimizing their hormones, and myself. This story started because I had a terrible, terrible injury, and I'm passionate about this. And I want everyone to know that there's real promise in these compounds. And I want you to share this video, document your experience, and just bring eyes to this because there's no one that's going to take care of yourself and our health than the consumer. We're the pivotal part of this market. But thank you guys. I appreciate you for watching the video and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks.